Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Thank you for joining us today a little bit earlier than we usually do. 11 a.m. here on the Pacific Coast, but it's actually, I think it's 2 p.m. where our special guest is today. So he's still experiencing Mom at Home at the regular time. I hope you're all having a wonderful, wonderful day. I am so excited for today's guest, Mr. Tom Brislin. Progressive rock is where it's at least when I was growing up. If you don't know by now, I'm a drummer, and obviously that not always equates to being a progressive rock music fan, but for me it did. I got my first taste in high school when a buddy of mine passed me a Moving Pictures by Rush tape, and I was like, what is this music? And that led me down the rabbit hole of discovering greater bands that were kind of founders of this wonderful, wonderful genre, including two bands that Mr. Tom Brislin was personally involved in, yes, in Kansas. We're going to explore his story, his career, his connection to these wonderful performances, how he's come up in his own right as a progressive rock, in-demand keyboardist, and then also his connection to his instrument and kind of his philosophy behind making music. And to help join us and guide us and direct us in this conversation, as always, is our very, very wonderful moderator, Mr. Bill. So I hope everyone out there is ready to ask some great questions and learn a lot about Mr. Tom Brislin today. It's going to be a fun, fun experience. Are you guys ready? Welcome to the show, everyone. How you doing?
Doing great, BJ.
Excellent.
You're doing great. You always set me up, so I better live up to that build up. Yes, we have Tom Brislin with us today. Tom is an amazing musician in so many ways. Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I would also like to thank a good friend of both of ours, Van Epperson, a tremendous LA-based actor and a huge fan of yours, and yes, and all things prog rock. Van, thank you. Van connected us for today's interview. Tom, your resume as a keyboardist is inspirational to anybody who would look to see what you've done, who you're playing with now. There's also Loaf, there's Debbie Harry of Blondie, Camel, Renaissance, and as BJ mentioned, Yes, which is where I first saw you playing, and today, Kansas. Inspirational, impressive. Let's go back a little bit, Tom. As a young boy, were you, I don't want to use the word forced, but were you compelled? Was it suggested that you take piano lessons as a youngster?
No forcing was necessary. I gravitated to the piano as early as I could remember. It was, probably the center of home entertainment in our home, that and the record player. And I was into both of those things. So I started banging on the piano. Fortunately, I had older siblings who played music. So my sisters were my first piano teachers, and my brother played in rock bands. So I was introduced to everything at a pretty young age.
Great. So it just felt right. You had great inspiration by your older siblings. And I love that you said it was the center of entertainment in your home. That's one of our big museum stories, dating all the way back really to the late 1800s. And it's great to know that's still a big part of families today. So you say your sister was teaching you at first?
Two of my sisters I have three sisters, and two of them were teaching me piano, and the other one had the great record collection. So I was getting into that as well. So I owe a debt of gratitude to my entire family.
Good. Well, I hope they're all watching today, Tom. Now, as you progressed at a certain point, did you then start taking lessons with particular teachers maybe in the area where you grew up, or people you'd been recommended to?
Yes, I took piano lessons from about the age of 7 until all the way through the end of high school with a teacher named Anita DeSorbo, who ran a music studio in my mile square hometown. And funny story, years later, when I worked with Loaf, Paul Crook, the musical director and lead guitarist, is another Jersey guy, and he took guitar lessons at this same place when he was a kid. So it was just kind of a bizarre small world experience that here we were touring the world with Loaf. We both took lessons at this little music studio.
Wow. That is what I call synergy, and the planets aligning just in the right place for you. That's wonderful. So At what point, Tom, you're taking lessons, you're learning, obviously you already loved music. When did you get so deep into it that you thought, this is what I want to do for a living? I want to reach all the way.
I had a very clear sense of purpose from the time I was, I don't know, between 7 and 10. It's weird that I say that, but I remember I was drawing the album covers of my albums that were to be made, even though I hadn't written the songs yet. And I just was way into it. My friends and I, when we were 10 years old or something, to try to make a band. And I think from that point, I've been either in a band or trying to get one going.
So there was no doubt. There was no, I mean, that was your path, and there was no left turn, right turn, U-turn. You were just going straight and all the way.
Well, when you're growing up, everyone tells you that that's not a viable career, or it's a very risky career, and that I should do something else to be safe, or the classic fallback scenario.
Right.
And yeah, I was always keeping my eyes open, but I knew that in order to go somewhere with music, I just had to stick with it and really put in the time and be committed to it.
Right. I mean, you have to go all in. It's all or nothing. I know in my sort of coming up years, I'd see guys that were, I call them weekend warriors, right? Because they had the day gig during the week, and then on the weekends they'd get together and play with their bands. And I think, great sounding band, but you could tell the difference between those and people such as yourself who went all in, and that's where their focus was.
I have to say though, so I know a lot of my fellow musicians who do what you described, who have 9 to 5 careers, and they play music in their free time. And sometimes it actually works to their benefit because they have no commercial restraints in terms of what kind of music they have to make. It's all for their joy.
Wow.
And I'm envious sometimes that they can be so free to experiment with whatever they want, whenever they want.
Right.
But yeah, so no shame in that. For sure.
Absolutely. No, I didn't mean to indicate shame, just a different approach. And you're right. The one thing that they have, well, probably several things, but one of those key points is, nope, I don't want to do that gig. I'm going to do this one because that's what's speaking to my heart. So now, starting with piano, of course, synthesizers, keyboard synths, and all that would have caught your attention at a certain point, and they're not expensive. Building up that arsenal is not an easy thing to do. But let's start with a question. Analog or digital? Do you have a preference between one or the other?
The answer is yes. Well, I am a big analog buff because the first synth that I laid hands on was my brother's Roland Jupiter 6. And it just sounded so glorious. And, in the 80s, when I'm discovering music for myself, everything was so synth laden that here was that sound that I was looking for. Not to mention that the fact that it just looked like a spaceship, and with all the lights and faders and everything on it. So I was always way into the analog sounds. Of course, the first that I could afford, the paper route money, were the little digital synths, and they didn't have that fat sound of the analog domain, but they could do other things that I was interested in as well. So I always thought that it would be good to have the best of both worlds.
Good. That's a perfect answer. And I kind of figured that's where that would go because, as you say, they both offer options. One might offer this, the other offers that, and you can combine it all together, which, of course, you've done. You've got quite a synth rig going. I hope this photo does it justice. Just want to share this with people and maybe have you tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here.
That was several years ago, probably at the height of my affliction. And I just thought it would be actually kind of comical just to look like I was just getting swallowed up by all the keyboards in the room.
This is awesome.
I still have a few of them. Some of them have moved on to other homes, but what my hands are on is a Hohner clavinet, which is a favorite instrument of mine. And to my left, on the right of the picture, is the aforementioned Roland Jupiter 6 that my brother had and has been so kind to let me use all these years. And those two instruments, I really try to get on as many recordings as possible.
Nice.
And right behind me, standing vertically, is I believe if I can see it, that's the Moog Little Fatty.
Awesome.
Which was a synth that I when I got it, I looked in the owner's manual and they had a preface talking about this instrument, and they gave me a little shout out in the liner notes as one of the artists that they consulted to make this synth, because I was touring many years with the Moog Rogue, which was another compact synth that they had earlier
Hmm.
on, and I was always hoping that they would go with something very straight ahead, really just sort of compact and just easy to rock out with. So I was really excited when that came out.
Nice. We've got one in the museum right now, actually, in our soon to be opened interactive area for guests once we can reopen. It's called a Moog Grandmother. Are you familiar with that one?
Absolutely. Yeah, they keep
Right.
turning out great stuff.
Mm.
They do. We had a little demo of the Grandmother, and it took me right back to the Mini Moog. Nice, fat, thick sounds. Beautiful. So I'm sure that you, like most musicians these days, you write, you orchestrate, you arrange, you record, you create charts using music software programs. What's your home studio setup like? Your DAW, notation software, interface, and so forth.
Right now, I'm running Logic Pro on a Mac as my main digital audio workstation, and also the companion software with that main stage, which is more for the live performance side of things. I use that on stage with Kansas. So
Mhm.
I'm in that ecosystem, so to speak. But yeah, I've been dabbling with computers and MIDI since DOS machines, and you couldn't even run audio, barely just get a few MIDI tracks out of things. But through the years, I've used Digital Performer and Pro Tools, because
Mhm.
when my old band Spiraling was recording, we were around during that transition that a lot of studios were doing from the reel-to-reel tape to the Pro Tools systems.
Hmm.
So if I wanted to speak with that world, that ecosystem, I got into Pro Tools a little bit. But for many years, I've been using Logic now, and um, use it. You mentioned notation. I even use that for notation, but I've also done Finale, Sibelius, Notion from PreSonus was another cool one. In fact, when I was tasked to join Kansas, I started notating a lot of the music that I was learning. And I was using Notion with an iPad and the Apple Pencil, because it's like the holy grail is just to be able to write notation and have it just magically turn into
Yeah.
music printed, which I haven't quite got there yet, but it's promising.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, that sounds great. And it is a process. I think people do have that sort of preconceived notion that you just go boom and there's your chart. But as you know from having done it, there's a lot of editing, a lot of tweaking, a lot of making sure measures look right, notes are in the right places, and so forth. And sometimes the programs will put a sharp where maybe it should be flat, to fit the key. So there's a lot of going back and reworking that.
I'd say until we all get microchipped, and then just think the music and have it magically appear on the page, and then on the pages of all of our musician, cohorts, then that wave of the future right there. It might happen. We don't know, but the tools. That's so amazing that you're diversifying all the tools that you've used, because you're absolutely right. Like when you go from one platform like DP and then try and work in another platform that's become an industry standard like Pro Tools, you have to either figure out how they don't work together, or you have to kind of learn how the other side is working for you and make it work for you. So that's really cool. I mean, I didn't realize what the entire package needed to be put together to accomplish the ends that you're trying to achieve. Great stuff.
Yeah, and it's like learning how to play an instrument.
Mm.
Each software package is like an instrument of its own, because there are the keystrokes and the shortcuts and the mindset, the user interface, and everything. You have to sort of get into a different mindset when you go to another platform.
Yeah.
Sure.
Cool stuff.
You made me think of something there, Tom. Every time you get, like you say, a new software, you're learning a whole different curve. Are you a manual guy, or do you just jump in and get in there and figure it out?
You know, you can't. I just have to dive in because
Thank you.
it's right there. But
Yeah.
I tell you, it's nice to be able to just have the answers to your questions be just a search away.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing, because you might recall one of the things about coming up in the 80s with some of this technological gear is that the manuals weren't always clear about things.
Mhm.
And now it's funny, even sometimes I get stuck on something in Logic, and I go to YouTube, and there's some 13-year-old who's made a video saying, all right, what's up, YouTube? I'm going to show you how to do this thing in Logic Pro. And problem solved.
Exactly. Thank goodness for the kids. Yeah, when I first started buying DP, Digital Performer, and Finale, I mean, the manual would show up with it would be the size of the Bible. And it was just intimidating to look at the size of that book, let alone jump in and try and figure out what it is you were looking for. Kudos to YouTube and these 13, 14-year-old kids that have it all figured out. So, Tom, as BJ was introducing you today, he said, progressive rock, big part of your forte, your genre. Did you decide that's where you wanted to go, or is that where life took you?
I had decided that at one point, and was beaten down and discouraged by the world not to do, because when I was a teenager, my friends and I had a prog rock band, and this was still when like the big hair Jersey rock would be pre-Nirvana, the end before Nirvana era of music, and we were already out of place, and this was already our older siblings' music. We were already an anachronism, but we had a good time. And then I actually went off to college and started really getting serious about jazz and classical music, and just getting honed on the piano, but still writing rock songs. And those progressive influences stuck around, but I was also getting into jazz rock influences and even hip hop influences, new wave, indie rock. Everything was just coming my way because I was just such an avid listener, and I was hungry for hearing anything that I could that was interesting. And when I formed Spiraling while I was in college, we were like a jazz rock plus singer-songwriter plus a little bit of progressive rock influences, and had over the years kind of evolved into a modern rock band. But little did I know that starting to play with Meatloaf, which I put him squarely in the classic rock world, that would lead to Yes, one of, at one point my favorite band growing up. And that opened the floodgates to all the prog bands getting on their radar. So play with Camel and Renaissance and the Sin, and ultimately leading up to Kansas.
Yeah.
So I look back and I think I go, oh yeah, I guess I am a prog rocker. Even though when I write music on my own, I don't discriminate, and I don't try to shoehorn things into a genre. So.
I mean, all those influences obviously play a part in who you are as a total musician, which is great that you had those in your college years and investigated all that. Because you're right, in the 80s, I mean, again, I was a Yes fan from 71, and to me, the 70s was kind of the pinnacle of that genre of music. In the 80s, it started getting sort of knocked around a bit because of all the other music's coming in. But having that pedigree is tremendous. I mean, because prog rock is so huge again now. We've got a question and a hi. We have hi Larry. We have Larry Groupé on with us today, Tom.
All right, hi Larry.
And you know what? Let's jump ahead here. I was going to ask you about working with Larry on the Yes Symphonic tour. To me, there was so much amazing music going on in that concert. Full orchestra, the Yes Band. I mean, the concept initially, if I remember correctly, was the orchestra was going to be in place of the keyboard player, but then when I came to see the show at the Hollywood Bowl, there you were. So working with Larry's arrangements and with the orchestra, how did that work?
I think that it's possible that Yes may have originally intended to have the orchestra replace the keyboards on the symphonic tour. That might have been in the conversation early on, but they pivoted pretty quickly on that. And I know that they worked with Larry Groupé to arrange the classics with a really full orchestration in mind. And also he did the orchestrations for the new album that they were making at the time, Magnification. But when John Anderson called me to join the band, he specifically said, I want you playing everything, every single sound, every single part. Oh, and I hear that you sing too, so I want you to sing harmonies with the band at the same time. And so I had my work cut out for me. But once we got together on the sound stage, it was really a great experience to hear the entire orchestra and band come together with the great work that Larry did.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a phenomenal show. And anybody who missed one of the live concerts, there's a tremendous DVD, yes, symphonic DVD. I think John has said that was an orchestra in Poland. Am I correct on that?
Yes, that was during the European leg of the tour, where for the first half of the tour, we had young orchestra from Poland who was on the DVD. And then in the second half of the tour, we had an orchestra from Belarus that was
Okay.
also excellent.
Yeah. Yeah, John spoke so highly of that orchestra, not only the way they played, but how much they enjoyed the music, right? I mean, and you watch the DVD, you see the strings just rocking out. Everybody's having a great time. And there you are with the guys I'm going to call the masters.
Yeah,
How much?
you gotta pay respect to my sideburns game in 2001. No, that is one of my favorite pictures, which is actually a capture from the DVD, I think. And
I think you're right. Yeah.
yeah, and because for the most part, every show, with certain exceptions, sometimes we'd play a different song in the set, but most of the set was intact each time, including where everybody went on the stage. And Chris started coming up to me during Ritual and Starship Trooper to interact with me, because we were having a good time, and just seeing Chris Squire striding toward me on stage with his Rickenbacker bass, I was like, oh, well, okay, baby, it's on. Here we go. Here we go. So yeah, that was really exciting, and
no
just a
doubt.
tremendous experience.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
I think I've heard Chris referred to as the gentle giant. Such a kind man, amazing player. To me, one of the most fascinating things he did as a bass player is he would play these pedal tone notes that didn't necessarily fit the chord passage. It was floating over those notes, but he made it work. Always fascinated me. So when you got the call from John, and God bless John for listening to the tapes that are submitted to him and picking people that he thinks, yeah, this person would work well for this person for that. How much time did you have to get all that music ready?
Max, because I think originally, so I was in Meatloaf's band touring, and we were getting ready to record an album, which was eventually released a couple years later, called Couldn't Have Said It Better. And when there was talk about, yes, possibly needing a keyboardist for a few select dates. And I think this was while maybe they were looking at reuniting with Rick Wakeman, but he was on a massive tour of his own, so he wasn't going to be available until 2002.
Wow.
So I was, kind of getting extra bold with the management, saying, I grew up with Yes, I could do it. Like, what do you, I guess you have to throw your hat in the ring and then back it up. So, because I mean, I saw this sliver of an opportunity, and they said, okay, start making a tape. But there was no timeline. It was just, after you're back from Meatloaf tour, you make a tape when you got some free time, and they'll take a look at it. That never happened. So I eventually got a different phone call that said, change of plans. Yes is going out with an orchestra for the entire year of 2001, and we want to consider you on keyboards. So I had to make a different tape, which was they sent me a live recording from their previous tour of them playing two songs, two audition pieces. This is Yes. Each of those audition pieces was over 20 minutes long. So it was close to the edge and the gates of delirium.
Oh, my Lord.
I get it, because they went for the jugular, because I guess they figured if I could hang with that stuff, that I should be in good shape for the tour. So what I did was I recorded myself playing along and put my performance on the left speaker and put the tape that they gave me in the right speaker, so they could use the balance control and single me out and hear just what I was doing, and hear how I meshed with the recording. And based on that, they invited me to come visit them while they were recording Magnification. So that was like part two of the audition, was basically a hang. They didn't know me at all, and they wanted to see what I was all about. And, I 27, I kind of look like a skater, show up at the door, and they're like, "Yes, may we help you?"
Are you the pizza delivery?
And so but it was a really good hang. And the fact that I was so familiar with this band and knew all the interviews and all the stories and knew the temperaments of the people in the band, it gave me a little bit of an assist when it came to just interacting and getting to know the guys in short conversation anyway.
Yeah, because I mean, you've already had the experience of touring a high profile artist already. So a lot of, there's different legs of the fence that you go through where, if you're an average fan and you get so starstruck by your heroes, it's like, you can't react. But then going through and being, having the professional chops, putting in the work and the dedication, and then putting in the time as a touring artist, you've already kind of gotten codified and put into this scenario. Now you get to move it to the next level with Yes. So I mean, I can only imagine that has kind of tempered your ability to react with all of these, what some would consider really high profile artists, and then become part of that family too.
Yeah, there's no place for just being just a starstruck fanboy or whatever. That doesn't get the job done. And like you said, I'm glad that my career was sort of progressing in the order that it did, because with Meatloaf, we were touring the world, and that was a big show and a challenging show for me on piano, because this was like Jerry Lee Lewis eighth notes all night.
Wow.
I looked like Popeye when I got back from the and so but to have some years under my belt as a professional touring musician, got over all that star stuff. And I mean, I chuckled when I first heard them all talking to me, because I remember hearing their voices all of my life in interviews and on records. So I thought I was amused, and I was pinching myself a little bit, but there was no time to waste on that. It was like you asked before, I had maybe a couple of months to get ready, and less than that to get those audition pieces.
Absolutely professional. That's awesome.
That's the stuff that dreams are made of right there, Tom. I love that story. We have a bunch of great questions. Can I shoot those your way?
By all means.
All right. One of our most faithful viewers and also a museum volunteer, Brian, asks a couple of questions. Looks like he did some research here, Tom. Brian asks, you used to tinker with TV commercials before taking lessons. What was your favorite?
Oh, I think you may be referring to an interview I did where I said that I was learning music by ear almost immediately when I started getting on the piano. So while my sisters were teaching me how to read the staff and read music and play piano and the primer, the red booklets that everybody gets, I was hearing all of these TV theme songs and commercials and things, and I started sorting them out at a young age. And I found early on that it was a great way to get attention. So lo and behold, I kept doing it to just get a chuckle out of my siblings and my friends and everything. So I don't know. I'm trying to think. Of course, I like the Star Wars theme and the Greatest American Hero. Back when TV theme songs had like 2 verses, 2 choruses, and a bridge.
Believe it or not, I'm walking on air. I love
that
theme
5
song.
minutes in and they're still doing the theme song. So,
Amen to that. And theme songs are such a huge part of setting up the show. I watch current sitcoms, and you got about da boom, and off they go. That's the theme song. So
or just one tone.
Yeah. Branded. It's branded now.
So I've got another one for Brian here. Brian asks also, did you put your own voice into the Yes Kansas cover tunes, or did you keep the original feel and parts?
As a baseline, not baseline, but as the foundation of
you play bass
of what
too?
I do. Yes, that's the international symbol for bass, by the way. You have to hold your hand up.
As opposed to.
Yeah, right. And no, my screen isn't reversed. I am left-handed. As a foundation, I want to get it true to the original, because it's fun for me to try to recreate that. And also as a lifelong fan of certain albums myself, I have an attachment to the way things were played, the way things were sung, and the way things sound. So I want to start there and get it as close as I can. And to me, that's kind of like the price of admission. You know, once I can get that and build trust with the band, then they start giving me a little bit of rope and saying, you know, and I have to pick my moments carefully because I don't want to just be a photocopy of the record live, because you could just go and listen to the album. So I want it to be familiar and true, but at the same time, I want people to realize that they're at a live show. So I have to pick my moments to improvise, or to, even in subtle ways, you know, if I interject a couple different chord qualities or chord voicings.
Right.
So that's where I stand on that.
And at that point, you say, as you said, you sort of earn the trust of the band. So are they pretty lenient then when they hear something that obviously they're going to know it's a bit different? They're cool with that, run with that?
Yeah, and again, with Yes, I didn't change much, except for maybe a few lines in some solos, which is where you would expect them to be different, because even the various members of the band over the years have, for instance, the organ solo in Roundabout. You listen to all these different live Yes recordings. No one, including Rick Wakeman, plays the solo exactly like it was on the album, because it's, you know, you got to be in the moment too. So I try to, again, balance the familiar with the fresh. And as far as Kansas goes, I also look at how each of the other band members approaches the parts. And so on a Kansas song like Hopelessly Human or Closet Chronicles, which is so intensely orchestrated, it makes a lot of sense to try to nail it as the record does. But there are also a couple licks and solos that this song wouldn't suffer if I just threw in a, you know, little left turn here and there.
Right.
And being an actual legit member of Kansas from the moment I joined, they've also given me that seal of approval and that trust that, you know, I'm going to take care of this position.
Yeah. And, you know, as you were saying that, it reminded me of the other side of that coin. And that is, of course, the fans that grew up listening to the studio albums. They're going to come expecting certain parts because they've got them in their heads already.
Yeah. And that's one of the questions that I asked myself. I said, what would I want to hear if I was in the audience? Because I have been in the audience many times. And there have been times where I've been like, yeah, all right. And then sometimes be like, what's going on here? You know, like, because, you know, we're all, and again, I'm a professional musician. I have to think critically all the time.
Yeah, right.
As a musician, that's the part you tune into. I'm like, I always listen, you know, I'm a drummer. I got to listen to the drum part. Bill's a guitarist. I don't know if it's just nature that draws us to it, but I understand that sentiment.
And also at the same time, not lose the forest for the trees. Sort of zoom back out and just listen innocently. Just think, is this enjoyable to me? Am I digging it?
Right. And if it's enjoyable to you, that's going to transmit to the audience as well. So many great questions coming in. If you don't mind, I'm going to keep going with those. This gentleman obviously saw one of your live shows with Kansas. Kevin Loney asks, what attracted you to the Kansas epic Song for America? How did you convince the band to play it, complete with the middle section piano solo on that last tour?
I've always loved Song for America, because my first Kansas album was actually a CD of the best of Kansas, thanks to Columbia House's 11 CDs for a penny. I think it was.
Remember it well.
And that was the most proggy song on the best of, because I knew Wayward Son and Dust in the Wind and the hits that I was familiar with, and I liked all of it. But then when this Song for America came on, there was this majesty to it, this epic progressive quality to it that is so uplifting. And so when I joined the band and started doing my homework, I was listening to their live tapes and contrasting it and comparing it and cross-referencing it with the original recordings. And I noticed the main difference was that there's a big piano interlude in the middle of the studio version that they don't do live. I don't think they have done live since maybe they first came out with the song. It's been modified and for various reasons. I mean, remember they were probably also touring at a time when there wasn't always a real piano and on stage, and sometimes you have to modify the set just for the sound, and you don't want to get too exposed on those things. I'm guessing here, but that piece, that interlude, it has that, what I call the Emersonian quality to it that I love. And, you know, Keith Emerson is dear to me, and I could feel a little bit of a Keith influence in that. And so I started digging into it, and I learned how to play it first, and then went to the band saying, what do you think about bringing this thing into there? You know, the interlude. They're like, really? We haven't done that in a long time. And they're like, send us a tape. So yeah, take a video of you playing it. And so I got to work and I did it, and they all came back to me and said, all right, we're going to put it back in. And we first performed it with me on the Rock Legends cruise. And we were on the pool deck in the sun using rental gear, no sound check. Everybody had somebody else's in-ear monitor mix, and like all the gremlins and all the, you talk about Murphy's Law, like everything was going wrong. Sun was completely in my face, right through the sunglasses, couldn't see a thing. And I'm like, all right, this is a great way to play my first gig with Kansas. You know, it's like, we're not playing Moni. You know, we're playing Song for America. So, you know, but when we played it, and when we did the break, I could hear the hardcore Kansas fans like start to respond, like okay, it's back, you know. And so it was a really good feeling. And so yes, I made my job a little bit harder every night. but it's so much fun, and I feel like it just is a beautiful piece of music that Kerry Livgren wrote.
That's fantastic. And you know, what you just said, I made my job a little bit harder each night. That really is, as all musicians know, what we need to do, push ourselves constantly. Otherwise, you settle into complacency and it becomes a job rather than a joy. Now, you just mentioned Keith Emerson, and I have a little short list here because prog rock actually goes all the way back into the 60s. So when you started to get into it in the 80s yourself, you had quite a list of players who you could look up to for inspiration. So I'm going to just read these names off, maybe give us a couple of words or sentences to what they helped you bring to your own musical palette. So let's start with Rick Wakeman.
Rick Wakeman was the player that I first heard that showed that the job of a keyboardist in a band is to play a wide palette of sounds. You weren't just the piano player or just the organist. He had strings over here from the mellotron. He had mini Moog sounds. He had the piano. He had the organ. So the orchestration aspect of it is really what influenced me. Now, a lot of people who are into Rick were attracted by the fast qualities, the fast fingers, and that's fun too. But to me, when I hear Heart of the Sunrise and hear those mellotron strings coming in, that's like, to me, the quintessential Rick Wakeman influence for me.
Fantastic. Keith Emerson.
Keith Emerson was probably my first superhero that I idolized, and he was like a keyboard hero. And there were a lot of guitar heroes and, you know, drum heroes, and the keyboard heroes he was just so in your face with everything, and just so amazingly good and well versed in classical music and imaginative. Like, he never played a boring chord. And talk about pushing yourself. So, you know, just pushing it to the limit. And around the time when I was getting into ELP and Keith Emerson, was around the time I was a teenager, and also getting into Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition through my school band and my classical studies. And then here's a band that did a rock version of it. Oh yeah, I was hooked.
Amen. Did you go as far back as the Nice with Keith Emerson?
Yeah. Eventually.
Yeah. Sweet. All right, one more, and then we've got a bunch of more great questions. Patrick Moraz.
Patrick Moraz is an interesting influence for me because I was getting into Chick Corea also as a teenager. Rest in peace. One of my favorites of all time. And when I heard because I heard the Yes music with Patrick, the relayer era, much later in life than hearing Fragile and Close to the Edge when I was 6 years old, 7 years old. And this relayer was a different animal.
Yeah.
And I was hearing the Chick Corea influence. I was like, you're bringing some jazz. I just thought of it as a whole other world. And here he is bringing some jazz into the Prog. So that stuck with me. And I've actually played with Patrick a couple times. He sat in with Renaissance, and we had some fun keyboard conversations on stage. Some would call it a duel. I like to call it a conversation. And we had a great time. And he's been a big supporter of my solo music as well. He's been a good advocate for that. So
wonderful. Yeah, I prefer your term as well. To me, music is not a competition, is not a duel. It's a conversation between people. Absolutely, that's what makes the great bands what they are. Some more great questions, and then I do want to talk a little bit about spiraling. And boy, we're going to be up to the hour before we know it. A couple of questions from a viewer named Barbara. Let me back up. Let's see. Let me ask you both of these, and you can roll them all into one. Barbara asks, "What's the difference between prog rock and fusion?" And then, and this is a testament to you personally, she says, "How do you stay so young and healthy being on the road all the time, which can be very debilitating?"
Well, I'll start with that question first. By the time I got into the world touring business, a lot of these bands had been there, done that with all the wild living. So we all got down to business, and, next thing you know, we got, we're juicing vegetables backstage, and
awesome.
Because it can wear you down. So
right.
I think if you act like you're on vacation, or if everything's a party all the time, I've seen that happen. I've seen people burn out pretty quickly. Yeah. That's not interesting to me. Yeah. So good. As far as the prog versus fusion comparison, these are all labels that, I don't know, record companies and record stores came up with, I guess. But I think that the similarities is that progressive rock does fuse influences. But I think in their early, the British progressive scene, which was like the first one to really make the big impact around the world, was that I think a lot of those musicians were trying to not go for the typical, we're going to be influenced by American blues rock thing that most British bands were doing in the late 60s. So when I played with Camel, Colin Bass, the bass player, said that in the way he looked at it, and Andy Latimer too, the longtime band leader and guitarist of Camel, they said, we wanted to inject some Britishness into it. We wanted to see what would make this music our home music. So that's where you had all these canticles and motets and all these church music influences, classical music influences. But that versatility also brought jazz influences into it. For me, when I think of fusion, I think of when the jazz musicians got influenced by rock and electrified their jazz. And, you talk about Miles Davis, Bitches Brew, and everything after it. And, Herbie Hancock, Headhunters. Although, first word I think of when I think of that is funk. So there's blending of funk, R&B, rock, jazz, and it's predominantly more instrumental, I would say. I don't know. Let me know what you all think.
Well, I mean, I'm going to throw a name out there as Mahavishnu Orchestra. And that's, for me, that's kind of like the limited times that I've heard it. That's what would gel those two worlds to kind of together, where you've got this just so progressive sound. Everything's just moving so fast and all in different directions. But it takes on kind of that, I think of jazz or fusion as more of the jazz realm. I mean, if we're going to put things in boxes and genres and whatnot, and that's kind of where that pushes the envelope a little bit. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's just my own kind of interpretation of that. What I've listened to, I'm like, wow, this is really just kind of blurs the lines between these other genres that kind of been categorized in such a way. So that's kind of the one example where I look at it, I'm like, wow, this is, you can go any direction with this that you want, and so it's cool.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summation of the term fusion. Let me get a few more questions here, Tom, then we're going to talk a bit about spiraling, the amazing work you did with that band. Okay, let's see, where are we? So many here. Anthony Galante. Hi, Tom. I'm a huge fan. Your thoughts on the Mellotron, and give Glenn Burtnick a shout out as a fellow Jersey guy.
Well, hello, Anthony, and hello, Glenn. Glenn helped get me started in all of this. I started playing in his band right after college, and it was
Okay.
his referral to Kazim Sultan, who was Meatloaf's musical director at the time, that landed me that audition, and you can just trace the steps from there. So the Mellotron, for those listeners who aren't familiar, is a keyboard that plays recorded sounds on strips of tape. And think Strawberry Fields from the Beatles, and Dream On by Aerosmith, and most early Yes from Genesis too. They were temperamental instruments, a lot of mechanical parts that would break, and they were big and heavy, and you could load this tape bank into a standard single keyboard Mellotron, and it would have 3 sounds in it, which is cool. But if you wanted any more sounds, you have to unscrew the lid and take this big rack of tapes out, put it. So there was a lot of work involved in it. So it wasn't long before musicians were looking for other avenues to produce their string sounds and their flute sounds and things like that. But it has such an eerie quality, because when you press a key down, it's a head, or a piece of tape is running along the head, but vice versa. I forget. But anyway, either way, when you lift up the key, it snaps back, and you have 8 seconds maximum for this recorded sound. So they would record these orchestras playing middle C and C sharp and D, and they play all those recordings. And there's a certain humanity in there, because they are recordings of musicians playing these instruments. So it has a very cool thing. And I had one for a while that it was in my stead. I didn't own it, but I don't know. I'm surprised it didn't make it into that mega keyboard picture that I had from before.
We do have one. We do have one at the museum. I think it was owned by Karen Carpenter at one point, but yeah, it was. Yeah. They are, it's an early sampling testament, analog sampling into a huge box, and then I think other innovators like Kurzweil and other manufacturers said, we could do this digitally too. So it was that stepping stone. It was that one of these amazing stepping stones that got us to where we are today.
And in between the Mellotron and in the Kurzweil, the digital sampling, there was the Birotron, which we have a connection with at the museum as well. And Tom, if that hasn't come across your radar, check it out.
You have a Birotron at the museum?
We have a Birotron.
I didn't know that any had survived.
It's pretty amazing. It's a cool story.
Didn't Rick Wakeman set them all on fire or something like that?
That was actually the previous instrument we were talking about. Rick actually got on board to be a funder for the Birotron.
Right.
And then life being what it is, it didn't quite go. But Dave Biro, who invented that instrument, amazing mind, and played with 8-track tapes, so he eliminated the tape loop, or rather the fact that you had to stop the tape with a continuous tape loop. Crazy, wild stuff. All right, we're going to run out of time. Let's get to Michael Newton. Michael asks, how did the process of collaboration with songwriting work with Kansas? And how were your sketches when you presented them? I'm sorry, how full were your sketches when you presented them to the group?
Good question. Thank you. I think that the position that Kansas was in when I joined was a bit unique in that a fair amount of the music had already been written by Zach Rizvi, and he makes these really detailed demos that practically sound like albums, because he's a multi-instrumentalist, he's a producer, so he's got guitar sounds, keyboard sounds, drum sounds, everything that is in his vision to really pump the song up and show the band, what's cooking with this song. But he doesn't write lyrics, so I was thinking, well, if I'm going to be involved in the writing, what better way than to start writing lyrics to some of these songs that have already been given the green light. So there were 6 songs, four of the songs that Zach was writing that I got to work on lyrics for, and they got the green light. Everyone was vibing on them, and then there were still a few more spots open on the record for some new songs altogether. So I was writing those music and lyrics for those, and taking a little bit of a page from Zach's book, I tried to make the demos pretty detailed, but I didn't want to get lost in the details. I was trying to make sure that the songs stood up on their own but I wanted the guys in the band to hear what it would sound like if a band was playing it, not just me at a piano.
Yeah.
And so I would do a little bit more pre-production in Logic and just play finger drums, or and play synth bass, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then gave it to the guys, and they used that as a template to work from and infuse their human qualities into it, and really brought this stuff to life.
I mean, when I read that you had co-writing on, I think, 7 of the 9 tracks on the Absence of Presence album, and they had you sing the title track and the closer, obviously they gave you a big green light and a thumbs up for what you brought to the party.
Well, I was singing on every demo that I wrote lyrics for, with the intention of just being a reference for Ronnie Platt, our lead vocalist, to take and really, give it his energy, which he did for most of them. The song The River Sang, which is the final song in the album, was one where the band thought that they heard something in the demo that I did that they liked.
Mm-hmm.
That they thought, let's have that on the album. And that's consistent with Kansas. They always have alternate lead vocals on albums, from Robbie Steinhardt in the earlier days singing
Mm-hmm.
lead on certain things, to Billy Greer in more recent times singing lead
Mm-hmm.
on certain things. So it's part of the Kansas makeup to have that on an album. I didn't expect it to be me, but it was really fun to do.
What a nice surprise. And you're about to release a live album as well, coming out, I believe you said, in May.
Yes, I think pre-orders just started today, and in late May it will be released. It's Kansas Point of No Return live and
Mm-hmm.
beyond. So this is all from the 2019 and the 2020 tour. We actually did get a few months of touring in before everything shut down. So this is it's double disc. There's over 20 songs on it, because we did a pretty full show, and it's widely represented on the album. So I hope everybody will check that out.
We're looking forward to hearing it. Where can people find it, Tom?
kansasband.com is probably your best bet.
Okay.
And also Inside Out Music. You can go to their website, and in different parts of the world, do a Google search for them, and Century Media, I believe their store has it too.
Okay, perhaps we can add that information to our show notes here so people can reference that right off of your listing here. I've got one more question. Sounds like this is a friend of yours as well, Tom. And then I'd like to quickly talk about Spiraling, because you took on a Yes song that no band would take on, but you did, and did an amazing job with it. Okay, Gregory Coase asks, and I apologize if I'm getting anybody's last names wrong. For a short period of time, Tom was doing in-home private concerts. Could you talk about any fond memories of those? And then in parentheses, Gregory says, also, I played laser tag in Montreal with Tom.
I will neither confirm nor deny such assertions, but thanks for the question, Greg. I mean, is that not the most, like, if there was one thing that you were going to expect to learn in this interview, is that I played laser tag in Montreal, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
So,
if Greg hadn't asked that, I would have.
House concerts are really cool. I played with Francis Dunnery's band for a time, and he is way into the in-home concert scene, because he's a troubadour, he's a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
I tell some stories, but once I got a piano in front of me, I'm a little bit more zeroed in on the music. But I gave it a go, and I did some living room shows, house concerts, whatever you want to call them, and I really like it. And some of these places had nice pianos for me to play on.
Nice.
And what I love about the house concert scene is that anybody who was there to hear the music. You weren't fighting with the distractions of a club, or even a theater or a cafe. And so I was touring for my album Hurry Up and Smell the Roses, which is pretty intimate sounding record. And so I was performing solo versions of all those songs, and I was able to get the dynamics down to where you could hear a pin drop, and then and have the full range and not be swallowed up by the din of whatever.
Yeah.
And so I really do enjoy the house concerts, and if anybody has a chance to go see anybody they like in a house concert, do it. Once things open up and get safe to do so, I have a feeling people are going to be getting into a lot of things where they can be together.
Okay. You got my little brain here thinking, Tom, since you made the point of saying you love playing the house concerts because people were there to hear the music. There weren't any of the distractions. If you're ever on the West Coast, it would be great to have you do one of our concerts because that's exactly how they are. People come to our shows and they are music listeners and music appreciators. Just throw that out there. All right. We're coming up on the top of the hour, but I do want to talk about this because it's amazing. It's fun. It's wild. Yes put out a song on their Relayer album, which I know you're very familiar with, of course, called Sound Chaser, which I describe as one of the most aggressive pieces ever. And you have this amazing band, Spiraling, that was active from about 93 to around 2008, I believe you said. And you have a YouTube video of your band approaching this song. It's about 10 minutes long, so we'll just play the first couple minutes up front because I want everybody to see what you do. Watch the amazing Rhodes licks you're playing. At a certain point, you're crosshand playing. You're singing while playing synth riffs. It's absolutely amazing. But I heard that John Anderson had a bit of a reaction for you when he heard that you were going to cover that song. Do you remember what John said?
He told me I was mad for trying it.
Well, you know what? I'm glad you were mad for trying it because your version is every bit as powerful as the Yes version. So let's enjoy that right now. Man, all I gotta say is wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
Jeez.
Yeah. What a tremendous band. What a treat. Tom, we're up against the hour, but one thing I want everybody to know that I read on your bio is that you were inducted into the Immaculata High School Hall of Fame in 2016, first musician ever. But you said some really neat things about the importance of music education in schools. Just in the last couple of minutes, maybe share with us your feeling about that.
Yeah, I was proud to be recognized as a musician because I wanted to advocate for the arts in schools, and I was fortunate to go to high school where music was really valued and really important, and I was able to develop my musicianship there. And I think a lot of times when it comes to music education in schools, people try to tout the side benefits, saying, okay, we want music in school because then you'll be good at math if you do music. And that may be true, but I also wanted to sort of advocate for the arts being valuable in and of themselves. And that it's a beautiful part of life. It's an essential part of life, I think. It's what makes us human. And so I do think it's valuable. And so I took that honor really seriously, and I made it a point to just advocate for music education everywhere.
Well, we couldn't have said it better ourselves, Tom, because that's a huge part of the NAM program as well, advocating for music education in the schools, globally, everywhere. So with that, on behalf of those of us here at the Museum of Making Music, Tom, and everybody at NAM, we thank you so much for being here today. This is absolutely wonderful. What a tremendous story, and we just wish you continued success with everything you do.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'm going to take us in and let's take a look at what's coming up. And again, I just want to echo Tom's sentiment. Yeah, music being a part of the human condition. I'm so glad to see that that's being advocated just beyond our conversation here. So keep that up, man. That's wonderful. All right, on the horizon, everyone. Let's see. We've got not next week, but 2 weeks from now, April 9th. We're going to take April 2nd off just because April Fools, we can get a little bit, crazy around here. We don't want to mess with that weekend. So April 9th, we're going to come back with Mom at Home. We're going to be featuring some musical explorers, Henry Kaiser, Cheryl Leonard, and Mark McClure. And then I'm actually under the impression that we might have some extra guests that are yet to be named for this special episode of Mom at Home. But that's going to be coming up. They're going to be talking about Antarctica, music from the end of the world. All three of these musicians have done excursions down to the South Pole region, Antarctica, and discovered musical landscapes that, we don't often get to hear about. So they'll be sharing their discoveries, their music, their inspirations from their explorations to the southern tip of the world. And then following that, we have Tiffany Christopher on April 16th. We're going back to our regularly scheduled time, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard, for both the April 9th event and this. Actually, we'll let you know if our time changes, but we're going back to the standard 2 p.m. Pacific for the rest of our shows. Tiffany Christopher, wonderful songwriter, musician. She uses a lot of looping technology to create her own unique sound. She's going to be talking with us about how she accomplishes that, why she does it, and how that helps create her own sonic identity. That's the next two events coming up on the horizon. If you want to see our complete calendar and all of the times that we'll be presenting Mom at Home, please visit our website, museumofmakingmusic.org. You can find all of the events there, what's coming up on the horizon, and also we're going to be posting more information about our reopening schedule for the Museum of Making Music. As you know, we've been doing a massive site-wide renovation. We are coming around the bend and just about ready to cross the finish line with that and reopen to the public once again. We're going to be posting all of that information online and keeping everyone up to date. We can't wait to share that with you. Also, so visit our website too. We're going to be posting links for the show notes where you can find more information about Tom Brislin, the Kansas music that we talked about today, and all of the notes and details that we discussed. So you can discover all of that wonderful music on your own. Until then, thank you to our audience. So many wonderful questions today. I tried passing all of them along, but we just ran out of time. We couldn't capture everything. We do appreciate you out there watching live and participating in the discussion too. We hope you've had a great time. Until then, join us next time and take care.